Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monimaluwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very, very happy and so honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is C. Hope Flinchbaugh. She is here to celebrate her beautiful book, My House, My Family. Before we invite Hope into the studio, we want to let you know that your school needs a podcast. That's right. If you are an educator, if you are a parent of a kid attending school, your school needs a podcast. Having a podcast will help enrich minds, amplify voices, and connect families. Are you ready to embark on an innovative journey that merges education with entertainment? Our school podcasting services offers an unparalleled opportunity to embrace the art of podcasting enriched with the magic of literature. The Reading with Your Kids podcast has been helping families all over the world grow closer together through reading since 2017. We have a library of over 800 hours of interviews with many of the most respected authors in children's literature. Creating a school podcast with the Reading with Your Kids podcast gives you access to a treasure trove of content that you can use to captivate your audience. Let these stories spark discussions, ignite imaginations, and cultivate a love of reading. You can learn more by visiting our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and clicking on the Your School Needs a Podcast button at the top of the page. Join us right now from the great state of Pennsylvania. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new picture book. It's called My House, My Family. Please welcome to the show, C. Hope Flinchbaugh. Hey, Hope, how are you?
Hello there, Jed. How are you doing today? I am so glad to work together with you on this show.
I'm delighted to have you on, and I just wanted to take a minute. You were telling me the reason that your pen name is C, the letter C, Hope. You tell us, because I think it's a really great story.
Well, it's a play on words, capital C period, hope. I want people to see hope in what I write. And, of course, I asked my mother that, when I started writing. I said, hey, Mom, did you realize that you called me See Hope, and I want people to see hope in what I write? And she said, I never thought of it, but it turned out to work for me, so.
That's awesome. Well, your mom shouldn't feel bad because we launched the Reading with Your Kids podcast back in 2017 here in our studios in the lovely neighborhood of Reedville in Boston. And it was 2.5 years, and somebody mentioning it to me that I made the connection that we're doing the Reading with Your Kids podcast from a neighborhood called Reedville. So I was a bit clueless for a couple of years.
Oh, my word, which is awesome. I love what you're doing. I do. I looked on the website, and I'm like, oh my goodness, he's everywhere. You're on the Google, you're on Audible, you're all over the place. Amazon Music, anybody can find you, Jedley.
Well, we're really fortunate. What a wonderful time we're living in. And we're going to talk a little bit about the changes in technology in the world. But first, let's talk about My House, My Family. Tell us about this picture book, please.
Sure. My House, My Family is a book that is warm and inviting, and it's written in rhyme. Children love rhyme, and they're sure to enjoy a book, of course, that welcomes the deaf, the handicapped, adopted, foster, stepchildren, single-parented children, and even missionary child into its pages. And it's written in such a way that the small child, ages, I would say 1 to 9, will feel loved and accepted within his or her particular race, origin, community, family structure. It's very inviting in that way. And what's really neat about the book, and the publisher Familia's actually suggested this, let's put some discussion questions at the end of the book, and so that the child is actually invited to think further about, who is this? Who am I within this book? And for example, the first page of the book starts, "Sometimes I live with Mommy, sometimes I stay with Dad, but we are all a family, whatever house I'm at." And it ends with, "Sometimes I say I love you. They say, I love you too. We like to be together and do what families do." And it's that tone and it's that welcome that is such a delight to read, honestly. It's a delight to read to children. Now, the book is due to release August 1st, which is like a few days from now. And I'm really excited because I got my pre-copies last week. And I happen to have 3 of my grandchildren here. And I opened up the book. My book reveal went directly to my grandkids. So I'm sitting across the table from a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and they loved it. And I got to read it to them and then read through the discussion questions. And, 2 of them, I said, "Now, which page do you think represents your family?" And 2 of them were like, "Oh, the popcorn page at the end. We like movie night," So I got to enjoy the interaction with the children, which to me is the joy of doing what I do, is seeing the children's face light up.
I love this. I love this idea of celebrating family because, that's what the Reading with Your Kids podcast is all about. I launched this podcast knowing in the back of my mind that there's so many benefits of reading with kids. And obviously I knew that, kids would build up the vocabulary, and I knew that when you read with your kids, it helps them learn how to read and become readers. I didn't understand at that moment that reading with your kids also helps them build empathy. It gives them opportunities to kind of imagine how they would deal with situations in the world. Didn't realize that books can serve as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, helping us come together. I really launched the podcast because I knew that the relationship I have with my now adult kids really began with them sitting on my lap and us reading together. And so family is so very important to us, and not just your blood family, but the family that you choose. And that sounds, very much in tune with what you're writing about in My House, My Family.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you read to your children. My mother read to us, and I would have to say that she introduced all of us. When I say us, there were 4 children who visited her lap throughout the years. And she instilled in us a love for reading and a love to be read to again and again. And it helps the children to learn to read. You may know I also have because you mentioned this about learning to read and learning to articulate, I have a Baby Babbles series where the baby, it's a baby board book, and they can actually learn, be baby, say baby, see the baby in the mirror, and say bye-bye, and it has the lift, the flap, and everything. It's a lot of fun. And that particular book was really all about language and learning to read. And so that was a delight as well. And this one moves up, to the stage past the baby, where it's from, like I said, ages 1 to 9. And it's exploring family and what is family. And your family, it doesn't just help the child. Let's say that the child who's deaf and thinks, oh my goodness, I'm so different and I'm having a hard time communicating, or I'm having a hard time feeling like I fit in. It helps that deaf child feel like they're part of a family and it's normal, and it's okay. But it also helps other people to know how to relate to that deaf child, or to relate to the child who is handicapped, or to relate to the child who, maybe all of their relatives, and they see somebody at Christmas or Thanksgiving, but they know that, cousin so-and-so lives halfway across the world, and whatever a missionary is, that's a missionary family, and what's that about? So there's a discovery, and it's a slow, sweet, and warm discovery of family and family acceptance.
Yeah. So much there that I hope I remember to touch on. One of the things that I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about is, why did you choose right off the bat to talk about and celebrate a family of, I'm guessing, a family of divorce, where kids sometimes live with the mom and sometimes live with the dad?
Oh, because, I mean, it's more than 50% of children live in that environment today. And it's hard on them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and a lot of times they feel ostracized. They definitely feel marginalized, you know, and they look with longing at children. I interact still with children, so I can say this with authority. Some of those children are brokenhearted,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a good thing for them to begin to feel an identity with where they're at, and they're not the only one walking through a divorce or walking through a separation. A lot of times these days the family or the parents weren't even married, but simply living together, and when that relationship breaks up, they can be oftentimes, well, if it's not a good family situation, a lot of times they're in the middle of a war zone, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a good situation where the parents are mature and helping this child walk through that separation, that's still, you know, a difficulty. They have to kind of readjust, you know,
Mm-hmm.
well, who am I now? You know, or maybe there's a new marriage coming in, and the child is like, well, gee, it just used to be mommy and I, or it just used to be daddy and I, and now we have someone else coming in. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think that would be the answer to that one, Jedley.
Yeah, yeah. I also love that you are celebrating a family with a member who has a difference or disability. I think that is something that I'm really happy. I was very involved back in the late 80s with helping to pass the American with Disabilities Act, and created a disabilities awareness video, and had a program where some kids with very severe developmental disabilities were given an opportunity to develop friendships with quote unquote typical kids. Can you talk a little bit more about that choice and why it was important to you to include a kid who was deaf?
Oh, sure. Well, I have to go back to my roots. First of all, as a little girl, as a child, my parents worked at Arrowhead Awana Camp, which is up near Binghamton, New York. Excuse me, kind of on the Pennsylvania side. And that particular camp had deaf camp all summer long. And I had friends who were deaf, and of course I was 5 or 6 years old. I wasn't very old at the time. But my very best friend was Danny, and he was deaf. And Danny and another little girl whose dad was working up there, Amy, and I would play. Of course, this was during the time of, you know, rockets were a really big thing, and we would play on the broken down log, play rockets, and you learn as a child how to communicate with a child who's deaf, because unless you're in front of them giving them hand signals, they didn't hear what you just said. And, you know, so I'd have to go back to that, how much Amy and Danny and I bonded together as children playing rockets on that broken down log. That was our favorite game. It wasn't the only one. Mm-hmm. And then as I grew, I have a niece, and she had actually 2 children who are deaf, and the struggles that those children have been through, but also the delight, you know, of communicating. And one of the places I think that really blessed me the most is I went to a camp. Now, this is fresh out of high school. I went to a camp that had all kinds of children there, and they just happened to have one deaf child in the camp. And I had her speak the best that she could speak. I had her speak into a recording device, and she laid her hand on the recording device, and I explained to her that she was feeling the vibrations of her own voice.
Wow.
Because she couldn't speak, but she could make, you know, she can make these sounds. It was really neat to see the delight that went over her face, and the fact that she could actually communicate and feel her own voice with her hands. I mean, her whole face lit up. And so anyway, there's a lot to be explored there. There are people, friendships to be made, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And I love the fact that you were part of making this act push through. You know, I kind of did the same thing, Jedley, but it was more toward persecution, religious persecution especially, but just the totalitarian regime of North Korea. And so I took my children to congressional hearings where we heard people who had escaped from North Korea tell their stories. And so that's, I guess what I'm saying is you were active in what you believed in. And there's something about that, you know, being active. And I did the same thing. And I really wanted people to understand the stories of the Gachebe children in North Korea. And so I went to Washington as well and became part of a groundswell movement toward helping the North Korean people.
Wow. Every time you answer a question, there's so many more questions that pop up in my mind. This is wonderful. One of the things that you mentioned early on, and please remind me to ask you about the Gachebe children. That's just a term I hadn't heard. But you mentioned in the book, it's one of the families that we celebrate are missionary families, missionary kids. And I always make it a point anytime I have a military spouse on the podcast to thank them for specifically the spouse and the kids in that family for their service, because in addition to the person who is serving actively in the military, their family is making tremendous sacrifices. And I don't think that people also realize that, missionaries who go out and, are doing tremendous things in different parts of the world, that they have many times they have families, oftentimes with young kids who are joining them on that mission and helping folks. So can you talk a little bit more about your choice to include the missionary families and missionary kids in your book?
Oh, my goodness, you're pushing a really good button there. I went to Africa, to Mozambique, Africa, and I traveled for a couple of weeks with missionaries, and I was on assignment to write a feature article for Charisma magazine, but I was also there looking for the stories to tell children. And anytime that I have a story, and I've written for 80-plus magazines, and I love to write the news. I took journalism in college. I love to write the newsy stories, the feature stories, and I like to take those stories and then find out what the children are saying, find out what the children are experiencing, and go write for the kids' magazines. So when I say that writing for children is sort of like Hope's Candy, that's the truth. I write for adults and children. I've written fiction, nonfiction, novels, and nonfiction books as well. But writing for children is a delight. So when I was in Mozambique, Africa, I met one of the Christian missionary children. Her name was Crystal. And I ended up writing a story about that, and I featured it in Clubhouse magazine, Focus on the Family Clubhouse magazine. And it was called Christy's Best Dress. And it was a story of how a sweet little girl wandered onto the missionary compound where there were multitudes of orphans due to the war-torn area around Maputo, Mozambique. And this little child came in, and bless her heart, and this was the condition of many of the children. She had these worms between her toes. Her hair was full of lice. Her body was so shriveled, she was starving, she was hungry. She kind of wandered, looking for food, wandered into this large missionary place, and when she got there, just before this little girl wandered on, the missionary child, Christy, had opened up. They called her Christy, but Crystal was her full name. And Christy opened up a box from her grandma in the United States. And she had just pulled out the most beautiful dress. And this is a missionary child who doesn't get to see her grandma maybe once every 2 years, and when they're on furlough. And she's just like, oh, Mom, look at this. You know, it was such a blessing to her to have something so pretty. And when Christy saw that little girl and the condition that she was in, her mom, of course, took her and bathed her, washed her hair, cleaned her, and they were feeding her, but also they were about to take her for medical treatment. Christy came and said, Mom, I want to give her my dress.
Oh, so
and her
sweet.
mom's like, Christy, that's your best dress. You just got that from Grandma in the United States. She said, I know, but I have a grandma. I have a mom. She doesn't. I want to give that to her. And what a heart-touching story. We have children who are around the world who are giving in so many ways, including those gotcha-be children I told you in North Korea. I mean, the starvation is rampant there. And so sometimes the older children, when I say older, 9 and 10-year-olds, will take the babies or the toddlers, and they'll go back in a drain pipe or back in a cave or back inside of a place for shelter. And they'll put the tiniest ones behind them and the oldest ones out front. And the older ones will go out and beg for food, find food any way that they can and feed the little ones. And the children have a story to tell in our generation. And I want to make sure that they're included. I want to make sure that if Christy picks up that book, that she sees herself in there. My house, my family. And it's important.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more than the term gotcha be children? What's the story behind that name?
Well, gotcha be is my best translation, my best pronunciation, excuse me, of the children in North Korea who have no parents. And the situation in North Korea is so horrible. To live there as a child and to be a child in North Korea, if you have your parents, you're very fortunate. Now, I want to back up a little bit. I have a book called I'll Cross the River, and it's a novel based on the true stories of people who are escaping North Korea and some of the Chinese who are helping them when they escape over the Tumen River into China. There are Christians there that actually take some of them in. Most of them are the Christian churches that are above that river. And of course, it's illegal to cross the river, so sometimes the North Koreans are shot when they cross that river. And it's called I'll Cross the River. It has like more than 900 reviews, a 4-star if you go on Amazon. People were really touched by the story. And so I'm just sharing that, not to try to sell the book, but I'm just saying that this is it's a huge problem. So these children, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, their parents died of starvation because they were giving their children their food so their child would live, and eventually the child died of either malnourishment or disease that came on due to the malnourishment. And the name and the gotcha be is actually it's a slur. I use it, but it's used as a slur. People in the marketplace will see a child begging for food and push them away like, you gotcha be, go, go. And it's not something that they welcome because food is so scarce.
Sure.
And and famine has killed millions of people since the 90s in North Korea. And it's a dictatorship. And, we've gone from one leader, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, they've just, they keep getting passed down from one dictator to the next who is starving their people in order to remain in control of their nation.
Yeah. Horrible situation. But one thing that isn't horrible is your beautiful picture book, My House, My Family. I think you and I could talk for hours and hours. We talked just a little bit before we started recording about the technology and how that has changed. Before I ask you how people can use technology to find out more about you, you've been in the communications business for an awfully long time. What's the biggest change that you've noticed? And let's after talking about the depressing situation in North Korea, What's the biggest, most positive change you've noticed in the world of communication, publications, radio, television, video, all of that?
Well, I would have to say that the greatest change would be whether it's in print or whether it's audio, like what we're doing today, if it's video, access. A person has, any average person who has internet has access. And, back in the day, you subscribe to a magazine and that's the magazine, and you have 60,000 people, let's say, subscribe to this magazine, and those are the people who receive the magazine. And if they share it with a friend, well, all the better. But today we have access to those online interviews. We have access to multitudes of movies. I mean, the accessibility, it can be a friend or a foe, It can be addicting, but it can also be a friend because, you can find topics, subjects, you can find people, you can find help. So I think in that aspect, it's actually wonderful.
Yeah, it really is. And we have access to information that folks in places like Korea and China don't have, and that is truly a blessing. We want to know how we can have access to a place where we can find out more about you and find out more about my house and my family.
All right. Well, that's easy enough. You can go to my Amazon author page. If you go up on Amazon and you just type in Hope Flinchbaugh, that's F as in Frank, Linchbaugh, you can find it, or you can go to My House, My Family and just type that in and you can find it. Of course, the book is also carried in Books A Million or BAM bookstores, Barnes & Noble, and my publisher, Familius, also sells the book. And, of course, there are a few videos out there that you can find as well that would show someone reading the book. And I want the intelligence that you have, Mr. Jedley, so I can learn how to get on YouTube and turn the pages and read the book to children and have a lot of fun with that. That's my next adventure. So for me, technology, I'm just kind of running behind going, wait for me. Cause I want to do that. So you're like way beyond me right now. But, I look forward to doing that. I want to talk to the children. I want to read the book to the children, and I want to do it online. So
wonderful. We look forward to that. In the meantime, we want everybody to check out My House, My Family, beautiful picture book from our friends at Familius, written by our friend, our guest, C. Hope Flinchbaugh. Hope, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Katie O'Neill. Katie will be here to celebrate the Moth Keeper. That's the next episode of the podcast. Also, be sure to check out readingwithyourkids.com. There's so much on our website. Especially want to highlight our brand new page. It's called Your School Needs a Podcast. If you are an educator, if you are a librarian, if you are a parent of a child that's being educated or a grandparent of a child that's being educated, please be sure to check out readingwithyourkids.com and click on that Your School Needs a Podcast button at the top of the page and find out how you can use the power of podcasting to help your school family grow closer together. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, C. Hope Flinchbaugh. Please be sure to check out Hope's beautiful book, My House, My Family. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dieris, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.